Hey everybody, welcome back to Video Game Mess. So, check out a super fun, exciting, and even celebratory video for you guys today. Because if you watch me and the channel, you know recently I've been talking about the fact that Myrient, a video game preservation site with almost 400 terabytes of data, was unfortunately being shut down as of March 31st, 2026. Now, if you take a look at the calendar, it is April 1st, and no, this is not an April Fool's video. I don't do them. This news is 100% legit. Unfortunately, Myrient now is no longer available online. But the good news is, across the actual last month or so, I've been talking about the fact that another project was preserving every single last file on Myrient to make sure it lived for all time. And that definitely hit 100% status like 2 weeks ago or so. But I've been getting a metric ton of questions in the comments. What was going to be happening to this preservation project? Where were these files going to be accessible? Because it did take some time between actually getting 100% of what Myrient was downloaded to making it available to everyone. Well, that day has come, and now you're going to be able to browse the Minerva Archive again, just like you could on the previous website, except in a different means. And if you know me and you know the channel, you know I absolutely love talking about video game preservation, and I'm sure people will dispute this in the comments, they always do, but just try to be nice. Stuff like this really is preservation, because we're talking about some of the rarest of rare games out there, things that have not seen releases in 10, 20, 30 years plus, systems that actually barely anyone knows exist, and some games that if you don't own the original hardware you can barely even interact with outside of emulation. And in some small part, even some of my archive stuff here for the 3DO M2 is available on the new Myrient, which is called Minerva Archive. I mean, it really isn't the new Myrient, it is the same data, but it just has a different name with different people behind the project. But this again is 100% super important for the legacy of retro games, not just for the consoles you think about when you think of retro, but for all of the incredibly rare and incredibly niche files and systems out there. Because if you know me and you know the channel, you know I collect some of the weirdest stuff that you could possibly imagine. And you would think to yourself, Video Game Esoterica, if you own something like Ballad for Maria, why would you need any sort of archive for it? And that is because one of the floppy disks actually does not read, it has corruption, but with a 5 1/4 writer, and those do exist, I can actually recreate the one disc in this set that is damaged and play it on real hardware if I so want. It's one of those things, it's fun to have it on the shelf, but you actually want it to work as well. So now Minerva Archive is going to be available for everyone, but you'll have to Google that because it's one of those things you're not going to find a link in the description below for very obvious reasons. And you guys can debate whether or not something like this is video game preservation or not. You're never going to convince me it's not, but I allow everyone to have their own opinion and thoughts. The thing I care about is that you actually have a reason for the opinion, and that you don't tell somebody else that their opinion is incorrect. Everyone gets to choose whatever they want to think, and that is the only rule around here. And it is one of those things. I have contributed not to Minerva Archive, but to the actual preservation of some rare games, if you know me and the channel. And it's one of those things. I do actually own all the stuff that you actually see me talk about on the channel. I know it sounds weird, but it actually is the truth. And you'll see here, if you go under Arcade Konami M2 on the redump side of things, you're going to see at least one copy of every single 3DO M2 game ever released to the arcades preserved with a 1-to-1 bit identical copy. And how do you do something like that? Well, you just end up being an idiot like me and spending an inordinate amount of money and time trying to find all of this stuff to document it for everyone and to make sure all of these discs are preserved so that anyone can access them if they have hardware they need to repair or want to do research on it. And that really is the thing. These archives are representative of people that took the time out of their lives to make sure some of their favorite games, most important games out there, were preserved into the future. Because we know full well video game publishers and developers are the worst when it comes to actually preserving and protecting their own history, so fans jump in and definitely do that. So again, if you want to play any of the 3DO M2 games, either on MAME, even though those have existed before, or actually on real hardware, these things exist. You can click on them and you can get all the information loaded up. Because I can make you listen because you are watching, here's a soundtrack sample of Tobey Polystars, one of my favorite shmups of all time that no one plays, and I'll be right back with more. So what you just listened to there was Toby Polystar's being played on Unreal 3D M2 arcade hardware. Now, if anyone goes out and finds a PCB with the disc missing, and honestly and sadly, that happens like 9 out of 10 times a PCB is found, they can pop over to something like Minerva Archive, go ahead and grab my own redump copy, and be able to reproduce on CDR the game that actually runs that board. Because otherwise, without that disc, you end up with a very rare, very fun to look at doorstop, which really doesn't do anything. And again, this was an absolutely massive effort by a ton of people in the community to be able to make sure that Myrient was preserved for all time. And that really is what I love about the retro gaming community in general. When something like this happens, they rally around to make sure all of these things are saved. And that makes a huge difference. Just so you know, there is an FAQ on here as well talking about the different methodology for how they're actually distributing these files, because it is not a centralized server, therefore there really isn't any hosting cost, and if one node was to go down, obviously you're not going to lose the archive, unlike Myrient, which was a hosted website on a server, which means that if the person who was making it, who clearly did want to walk away, wants to walk away, then everything just disappears. Does that mean that it might take a little bit longer to download some of these files you need to restore your own hardware? Of course it does, but honestly, in a perfect world, this is about as good as it's going to get if we actually want stuff like this to persist into the future. And that really is exactly what we want, because when we talk about preservation, I'm talking about the rarest of the rare. Just recently, Andy Geezer was able to find and make work Crazy Streets Thrill Drive 4, and if you know me and you know the channel, I've been looking for this game for years now as well, and I had a few leads that just didn't pan out. But I have the I.O. as well as a security key for a game that never truly existed, never really saw any distribution, and has been 100% lost to time. And while this might not be on Minerva right now, it is a good case study of just how important video game preservation is, because I'm talking about games that are lost or would become lost if it wasn't for fans in the community making sure these things actually live a long life. Because Konami probably doesn't even remember that they had a Thrill Drive 4 in development, let alone one that basically went to location test and was never actually released into a wide market. I think maybe like 5 or 6 of these cabinets ever exist. So when I talk about video game preservation and why it's important, I'm talking about this stuff right here. Because a lot of people, when they think about quote-unquote video game preservation, start thinking about, do you need another copy of Super Mario World out in the wild? Honestly, we don't. This thing is probably like the top 10th most popular file on the internet at this point in time. But just because that in fact exists doesn't mean that the preservation aspect of keeping these games alive isn't important. Something like Akuma Mortis Immortal, a game that I in my Discord released maybe like a year and a half, 2 years ago, that's the type of stuff that needs preservation, and it is the type of stuff that you're going to see pop up on a site like Minerva now. And because I've got you here still, one more soundtrack example on another rare game, and I'll be right back. The reality is the history of gaming is filled with some of the most incredibly obscure and esoteric games out there, hence the channel Video Game Esoterica's name. Or something like Cooper's 9, also made by the same developers that made Akuma Mortis Immortal. This is a game, again, found and made working by my Discord last year, and I was absolutely excited to see something like this happen. I'm not saying we take 100% credit again. I have a lot of people helping me hunt stuff, but the point is that preservation matters, because I'm not talking just about the Super Mario Worlds and the Sonic the Hedgehogs of the world out there. I am talking about some of the deepest deep cuts that nobody even knew existed until they were talked about in video form and finally made playable. And that is the type of stuff that deserves and needs preservation and protection so it can live a long life well into the future. So Minerva Archive is here replacing Myrient, and that 100% matters, and I know you guys have had a fun time going along for the ride here of the news of Myrient being shut down, to the preservation project starting, to the preservation project hitting 1%, and now being available for everyone to actually access again. It is super important. This is the type of stuff I've loved to see, because video gaming has a long and storied history, and if it wasn't for fans protecting basically 95% of it, so much of this stuff would just be lost to time, and that's not what we have here. We have things protected till the end of time, or at least till the heat death of the universe, and you never know, that could be next Tuesday. If you have any questions or comments, leave them down below, but short of that, we are done. Hope you enjoyed the video, and again, just go ahead and Google the name, and I'm sure you will find the website. I'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye.